at the University of Redlands at the California Pacific United Methodist Annual Conference, doing a tape for Archives and History on the 28, the Mississippi Mafia who came from Mississippi in 1962. The technical director of this video is Phil Peace. I'm Darrell Wiest, and I'll serve as narrator today. We'll be interviewing Inman Moore and Ed McCrae, who in 1962 were part of the 28, who left Mississippi United Methodist Annual Conference to come to Southern California because they were no longer welcome because of their civil rights stance. Today we will talk about what was happening in the country in 1962, what was happening in Mississippi, what was happening in the church, and why Ed and Inman, along with a number of others, came to Southern California. We are here interviewing Inman and Ed, and I wanted to ask you the question about what was happening in the United States in 1962 that brought about your statement.
Well, actually, it was in January of 1963, Darrell, and the reason for it was right in the thick of the civil rights movement. Several things had happened in the 50s. The Supreme Court had issued some decisions that brought it to be, and then along about this time, the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. was coming to the fore. And when you put it all together, plus the scene in Mississippi at that time was total segregation from top to bottom.
Yeah, and a very defensive mood in terms of building a wall against the rest of the country. Just to back up, Darrell, you said 1962. Yeah, I think that was the really crucial year. The statement came out 1st of January, so it was 62 that things were happening. I wasn't long out of seminary, and it was through the Methodist student movement and the life at seminary and our interaction with Gammon Theological Seminary in Atlanta that began to grow in my sense of we need change in the South, and we need it badly. And then going to Mississippi, I thought, wow, we're a long way away from it. It was kind of scary, actually, to be in Mississippi, then to be classed as, in those days, the term moderate was equal to being a terrorist or a anti-American or communist. They really wanted to label anybody who was a moderate in Mississippi in that era must be a communist. It was a tough time. And I can remember the night that the riots happened in Ole Miss, which was in the fall of '62. That's one of the images that stands out in my mind. They were showing all the action there and all the horrific things happening when James Meredith was being escorted as a student onto the campus. And back then, television ended at 11 o'clock with the playing of the national anthem. And I found myself sitting, I was in the living room by myself, and I stood and sang the national anthem with tears, crying, thinking, this is my country, and we can't continue to live as we're living here in Mississippi this way. And it still catches me thinking about that, and that's, I think, where the motivation and impetus for me that something had to be done, and I had to be a part of it, happened for me.
Well, I think to continue what Ed was saying, you need to take a look at what the South was like in the 50s and the 60s, and had been pretty much so since the Civil War. It was total segregation. Blacks could not eat in the restaurants. They could not stay in a motel or a hotel. They could not go to church with the whites, could not go to school with the whites. I can remember as a kid not really realizing what this evil of segregation was, walking down a sidewalk and a 90-year-old black woman completely walked off of the sidewalk in deference to a young kid, white kid, walking down. They had to sit in the back of the bus. It was absolutely total segregation. You walked in a department store like J.C. Penney's in Jackson, Mississippi, there'd be a white restroom and a colored. They didn't use black. The word was colored. Colored restroom.
Not to mention drinking fountains.
Drinking fountains had 2 drinking fountains, one colored and one white. It was absolutely, totally segregated. Ross Barnett and the White Citizens Council were in control. Barnett was a member and had been elected by them governor, and his battle cry was segregation yesterday, segregation today, and segregation forever.
Now the churches were also segregated.
Churches were totally segregated, Dario. You had black churches and you had the white churches, and never the twain did meet except on certain occasions. If a white person died and one of the black women had been a maid in that home for many years, they would invite her to the funeral, but she had to either stand in the back of the church or sit in a balcony if there was a balcony. Same way with going to the movies. They could sit in a balcony, but never on the floor with white. What I was leading up to was that the church in Biloxi was a little bit different from most of the churches in Mississippi in the sense that it was a multiracial culture. It had a number of French, sometimes called Cajuns. The mayor of the city was French. You had a lot of Middle Europeans. It was a great fishing area, and in the earlier years Biloxi had canneries and so forth. So I was not immediately kicked out of the church, but I had already previously, just before signing the statement, preached a sermon over an incident where all of the blacks who tried to use the beach were met by a group of white young thugs with brass knuckles and chains and were beaten badly. I preached a sermon on Biloxi, the beach, and civil rights. The chairman of our board never spoke to me again. He was a prominent attorney and we had been good friends, but that was the end of the relationship. But it was tough in the church, but the church itself never asked for me to be moved, but I made that decision myself.
Yeah, at my church, like I said, a majority of the board, out of the 30 on the board, voted for me to stay, so I did stay until conference of that year. It was a tough 6 months from January to June for all those who stayed in the church. The others left the church right away. As far as our own family, we would get harassing phone calls. There was a period of time every 15 minutes, day and night, we would get a phone call just was shouting at us. A cross was burned in our yard. Things of that nature. No overt acts of violence or whatever. So I stayed on until annual conference, and then was moved at conference time.
Talk a little bit about how you happened to come to Southern California.
I wasn't planning to leave Mississippi. I thought, okay, I'll stick it out. But then I got a phone call from a district superintendent in the state of Washington offering me a church up there. I told him, I'm needed in Mississippi. He said, did you ever think you might be needed somewhere else?